everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I managed to complete in the month of December, the final month of 2021. Part of me wants to say good riddance, but at the same time, I don't know if 2022 is going to be much of a better year for anyone. These are all of the books that I reread as I was attempting to fall asleep due to insomnia. Unfortunately for me, it was a tough sleeping month. I had a lot of insomnia this month, so I ended up rereading quite a bit, but I will just go through these fairly quickly. The first book is The Switch by Beth O'Leary. I enjoy this book quite a bit, even though it's not my typical genre. I would classify this as literary fiction, but I adore this book because it makes me think of my grandparents, my grandmother specifically, very fondly, and just makes me think about all of the women in my life who have passed on. So this is kind of like a nostalgic read for me. It's kind of memory unlocking for me, and I just find it very comforting. So that's why I love The Switch. This is a 5-star read for me because I'm incredibly biased about this book in particular. Then I went on a little bit of a Becky Chambers reread session. I read To Be Taught If Fortunate, which is about a space crew taking ecological surveys on potentially habitable planets. This is super short, and this is a 4.5 out of 5 stars read for me. I also read A Psalm for the Wild Built by Becky Chambers, which is another novella of theirs. Again, I love Becky Chambers' writing and their characters, and this is a 4-star read for me. I really enjoy the friendship in this book, but it is almost too short in my opinion. But this is going to be a series, so I'm hoping that book 2 kind of fulfills all of my hopes and dreams for this world that Becky Chambers has created in this book. Then I got so excited about Brandon Sanderson announcing his newest releases, or the books that are coming out next year, specifically Mistborn number 7, that I binge read. The Wax and Wane books. So this is in the Mistborn saga. This is Era 2, books 1, 2, and 3 in Era 2. And then the final book in this, I guess, quartet is coming out sometime late 2022. That's if it doesn't get pushed back. So I got a little overexcited and reread The Alloy of Law, Shadows of Self, and The Bands of Mourning. But I, in general, had a really good time with this series. Brandon Sanderson is extremely readable. His plots and world building are fantastic. Overall, I would give this series in particular like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I had some issues, specifically in The Bands of Mourning that I tabbed, but I won't really get into it here. This is just a good time. I love the world building. The magic system is fantastic. I even enjoy the characters quite a bit and their humor and their banter with each other. I just had a few issues with it, so I gave The Alloy of Law 4 stars, and then I gave Shadows of Self and The Bands of Mourning each 3.5 out of 5 stars. Still a really good time, but not without its imperfections. Next category is romance. I read 2 romance books this month. The first one I'm going to discuss is Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. So I picked this up because I just needed something light and fluffy and fun and quick. And it was that. It fulfilled all of my expectations. This is about Rosie and Dominic Vega, who are a married couple, and they've been married for a long time. They were middle school sweethearts, and then they got married right out of high school, and now they're in their late 20s, and their marriage has kind of fallen apart. And so this book is about them kind of rebuilding their marriage, going to therapy together, and kind of working on things to try to rekindle their romance. And it does that. It does all of those things. I will say I really enjoyed the overall plot of this book. The couple going to therapy, Both of them kind of recognizing their role in the collapsing marriage and working through that. I enjoyed that plot. This is also about like Rosie kind of rediscovering her dreams of opening a restaurant. And so all of that I enjoyed. This is incredibly steamy. Holy moly. 5 spices. 5 out of 5 spices. Just the amount of scenes in this book was more than I'm typically used to in a romance novel, but I enjoyed it. I appreciated it. The one reason I'm giving this book a 3 out of 5 stars, though, is because I really didn't like Dominic as a character. He has this like alpha male, overprotective, brooding, but also like doesn't want to open up. He's that kind of character, and yes, he does improve and has character growth throughout the novel and by the end of the novel, but that is just not my type of male lead, if that makes sense. I prefer if the man or the male lead is a little bit softer. Then I read a TikTok favorite, which is The Love Hypothesis by Ellie Hazelwood. This is about Olive, who is a PhD student at Stanford. Hope that's right. I only read this like 2 days ago, so where is my brain? She's studying early cancer detection, and this is a love story between her and a professor, but he is not her professor. He's like a different faculty member, and his name is Adam Carlson. And this is like a fake dating trope where Olive is trying to convince her best friend that Olive has moved on, so the best friend can get with Olive's ex-boyfriend. So Olive throws herself at Adam and is pretending to date him in order to convince her friend to go after her ex. I enjoyed this book. I gave this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. And every single one of those stars is for Adam Carlson, the male lead. He is my type of brooding, dark, quiet guy. He has so much more emotional depth, in my opinion, than Dominic did in the previous book I was talking about. The reason I only gave it a 3.5 though is because this is told from one perspective. This is all from Olive's point of view. And honestly, me of all people is saying this, I wanted Adam's perspective throughout the entire thing because Olive was so annoying. I could not stand her for like 50% of this book. And especially because it was only told from her perspective, I found it not as enjoyable in that way. The conceit, the whole plot, like the fake dating thing, was so contrived and ridiculous. Like, there is some level of like suspension of disbelief that you have to go into any book to enjoy it, but this was stretching it. My suspension of disbelief, it was really stretched thin for this one. Some of the scenarios and the situations the characters get into to prove this fake dating thing was utterly ridiculous. I mean, obviously it's a romance book, but like that would never happen in real life. Like, it just was so ridiculous. Overall, I still think this book was a lot of fun. I just didn't love it as much as everybody else did. So definitely a 3.5 out of 5 stars from me. I managed to read one nonfiction book this month, and that was on Juneteenth by Annette Gordon-Reed. This is a short nonfiction piece about the circumstances leading up to and the effects of Juneteenth over time, and kind of the historical context of the holiday. I think this is a must read, specifically for Americans, since we got Juneteenth as a federal holiday in 2020. I really enjoyed this book. This had a lot of really interesting conversations that it brought up, and I thought it was done really well. It was really concise and focused, and talking about the Texas's relationship to slavery and really honing in on Juneteenth, and I think it was really well done. So 5 out of 5 stars for this. Next we have the fantasy genre. And the first book I'm going to talk about is Guild by Raven Kennedy. I gave this 2 stars. The reason I am putting this in the fantasy category is because this first book in this series has 0 romance in it. This is a fantasy romance series, which is why I picked it up. I was kind of interested in the genre. However, this first book has 0 romantic plot lines in it whatsoever. So that's why I put it in this category. This is about a woman who has been touched by King Midas, and she is like covered in gold. Like, she's basically made of gold, but she somehow survived being touched by him, and she is his prisoner, which is pretty disgusting. And the reason I gave this 2 stars is because, one, this is an incredibly readable story. Like, I just was kind of flipping through the pages really quickly, wanting to know what happened, but there is a pretty horrific sexual assault scene at the end, and the main character could have stopped it much sooner than she did. That's all I'll say. It was disgusting. I didn't like it. I will not be continuing the series. Not the dark romance for me. Then I have an anthology short story collection, which is The Strange Way of Dying. These are all short stories written by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This author is a favorite of mine. I have binge read so many of her works this year, and this is her own collection of short stories. And I gave this collection as a whole 3.5 stars, which is pretty high for me for an anthology or a collection of short stories. Usually I feel very middling about short fiction, like really short fiction, but I think some of these stories were executed so beautifully, so well, that it was just enough of a story, in my opinion. This collection is all about fantasy, magical realism, science fiction elements, all with the spin of like Mexican folklore, Mexican tradition, Mexican culture. Obviously I can't speak to that because I'm not Latinx, but I think this was a lot of fun. This had some hard-hitting stories, and there is one story in particular called Flash Frame that I think you can read on its own somewhere, and that was a 5-star short story for me. I thought that one was completely wild. So highly recommend this author. If you like short fiction, I would give this a try. All right, I might have a little trouble with this one. Please forgive me. The next fantasy book I'm going to be talking about is The Helm of Midnight by Marina J. Lostetter. This is marketed as a horror fantasy, which is why I picked it up. We're following a couple characters, but the main premise is that a magical mask has been stolen, and this mask is imbued with the essence of a serial killer, and murders start cropping up again that are reminiscent of the serial killer's murders. So we follow a couple perspectives. We follow essentially a detective trying to solve the crime and stop the murders from happening. We follow a character from a few years ago, and she is desperately trying to save her mother from a life-threatening illness, and eventually becomes entangled in this whole serial killer plot. And then we also follow the serial killer before he started killing, and then leading up to why he was killing and what he was up to during that time. So those are the main 3 perspectives. I quite enjoyed this. This was a 4-star read from me. The reason I say I'm gonna have problems with it is because I read most of this in November and then finished it right at the beginning of December. So some of the details are a little hazy, but the reason I gave this like a 4 stars instead of a 5 stars is because I was waiting for more horror elements to come up. This was a lot heavier on the fantasy and a lot lighter on the horror. Obviously, we're dealing with a serial killer. He's murdering brutally. Those victims are described in detail. Obviously that's horrifying. But I was waiting for more like intense feelings of dread and horror, and it was more like plot driven than that, if that makes sense. I wasn't feeling as much horror tension as I was anticipating, but I do think this is a great fantasy book and a great start to a series, so I will be continuing. I'm incredibly invested in this story. The last fantasy book that I'm going to be talking about is Lore Olympus Volume 1. This is by Rachel Smythe. This is a webcomic that was published traditionally, and so obviously the story is all published online, so you could choose to subscribe to this creator and read all of the content that way, but I chose to wait until it was a physical form, just because I wanted to see what it would look like on page. And this is a Persephone and Hades retelling. And of all the Hades and Persephone stories I've read recently, I really enjoy this one. I think Hades and Persephone are really adorable. All of the other gods have really great personalities and interests, and they're a lot softer in this retelling. One thing I really enjoy is Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. The main three are actually like really loving brothers to each other, which is something we don't normally see because in the original texts they hate each other, right? So yeah, I quite enjoyed this. I gave this 4 stars. There is a pretty intense sexual assault scene that is described or shown on page, which was hard to see. Be careful with this one. And I'd say Persephone and Hades retellings in general, like, it's kind of ingrained in the story. It doesn't need to be there, but it is part of the story. Hades does not commit this assault, just saying. The other criticism I have is that some of the images were so small on the page. So, for example, look at how much white space is around some of these panels. In my opinion, and I actually had a hard time seeing them, so I had to bring it really close to my face just to read what was going on. I think the way that this was printed, it could have utilized the page much more. Like, look at this. There's so much white space, and you can hardly read what's on the page. So I ended up having kind of a hard time with the physical format because I had to read it like very close. So that is my criticism and my review of this. Again, 4 out of 5 stars. All right, the sci-fi genre. I only read one sci-fi book this month, but it was one of my favorite, if not my favorite, read of this month, and that is a memory called Empire by Arkady Martine. This was incredible. Absolutely loved this. This is about a woman who is an ambassador, and the ambassador who preceded her was murdered. So she goes to the planet where he was stationed and is trying to solve his murder while playing the diplomat and trying to smooth over relations between the Empire and her outpost. This was so great. I freaking loved this. If you like politically driven stories, I think this is top tier political intrigue. I just think the friendship in this was great. This is queer also. This is queer, and it has a polyamorous relationship in it, mentioned. And I was just blown away by the complexity of this world. The Empire's like culture was very interesting, so the world building was great. The characters were great. There's a lot of non-binary rep. I just loved this. I can't even be articulate because I was just like, there's just everything. I just really enjoyed my time reading this. Definitely right up my alley personally, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I cannot wait to read the sequel. It's on hold at the library, and I will be immediately devouring it as soon as I get it. The last category I'm going to be talking about is the Sarah Gailey binge. Sarah Gailey is a queer author who I have read from in previous years and have solidified that I love them in this month. I just read so many things by them, and they are a new favorite author for sure. So I started out by reading River of Teeth and A Taste of Marrow, which is a novella duology, and this is about, it's like historical retelling of this time period where in the United States has implemented a hippo farming practice because the United States is running out of meat, and so they import hippos and start farming them for meat, and hippos escape obviously and are running wild in the bayou. So this is about a bunch of basically thieves, outcasts, outlaws, criminals banding together to go and do a mission involving the wild hippos. This was wild, and it was a lot of fun, and there is a very queer relationship at the forefront, and the main players in that queer relationship involve a man and a non-binary person, and it was absolutely adorable, and I loved them. And this was just a really fun time, and I gave both of these novellas 4 stars. And that's kind of what kicked off my desire to reread other Sarah Gailey books and read more of their work. So then I read Upright Women Wanted. This is a reread for me about anti-fascist badass librarians traveling around in a dystopian world. And this is about a young woman who runs away to join them. And this is again queer, centering a non-binary character and a woman this time, kind of forming a romantic relationship. And this was fantastic. Upon reread, I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. Really, really enjoy Sarah Gailey's work. Their novellas are fantastic, and who doesn't love badass librarians, gunslingers in like a Western theme? Yes, please. The last Sarah Gailey that I read was Magic for Liars. This is about a private detective whose twin sister is magical, but she is not. And Ivy, our main character, is called to the sister's magical school to solve a murder that happened on campus. And I love this. This is essentially a detective story, but I really enjoyed the character work in this book. I thought it was fantastic. I had a great time with the magic and the characters and the character arc. I just thought this was great, and I gave it 5 stars, which is a very unpopular opinion looking at reviews of this, but I just had a really great time with this one. So Sarah Gailey cemented as being a new favorite author just because I love their characters so much and what they do with seemingly short amount of pages as well as a full-length novel. I can't wait to read more of their work. Those were the 17 books I managed to complete in December. I hope you had a fantastic reading year, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye. Happy holidays.